Hola, ongitori, bienvenidos. Bueno, tenemos el honor de presentar a Scottish Documentary Institute, que van a hablar un poco de lo que es este proyecto que está que ha empezado, que empezó hace 5 años en Escocia, y bueno, gracias a él, bueno, han podido crear películas documentales, tanto de género cortometraje como largometraje, que bueno, han sido distribuidas a lo largo de todo el mundo, en diferentes festivales, etc. Y bueno, es un modelo muy interesante que mezcla el tema académico con el tema artístico, y bueno, pues nos van a explicar un poco cómo hacen sus trabajos, cómo trabajan ellos y qué películas hacen. Tenemos a Mendelle como directora de Scottish Documentary Institute, y a Finley Presley, que es productor, distribuidor y director. Entonces, bueno, yo me llamo García de Bikuña y bueno, gracias por haber venido y espero que disfrutéis de esta sesión.
Hello everyone, it's nice to see so many faces and young faces, so I can only assume that you are all young filmmakers, probably at university, so we try to pitch the talk for your needs really. This is looking very formal, but let's try to make it as informal as possible. So we will talk, we'll show some extracts of the work that we've produced, but please, anytime, just put your hand up and ask a question. Don't feel that you've got to wait till the end, because probably by then you'll have forgotten your question, or it might not be relevant. So just, let's treat it as kind of an informal way. So as Alex kindly did that wonderful introduction, I'm Mendelle and I'm the director of Scottish Documentary Institute. But before I got to being the director of Scottish Documentary Institute, I was a filmmaker. And if I can just put you a little bit in the context of UK, because it's a different model of production than what you've experienced in Spain. Many years ago, in the UK, I'm talking about 30 years ago, all the work in documentary was dominating by television, and mainly BBC. I mean, BBC was a great producer. Now, in order to work at the BBC, you had to have connections, really. You didn't have any, you had one film school, but outside that, you couldn't become a filmmaker. It was completely blocked by the trade unions and the fact that BBC ruled the world of documentary. Then little youngsters like me at the time started getting involved in experimental filmmaking, and decided that we too wanted to have a voice making films, not just fiction, but also documentary. And we started, in a way, campaigning for access to documentary filmmaking. We were very lucky because at the time we had two forces going on in the UK, and they were very, very strange forces coming together. On one hand, you had a very right-wing force in the name of Margaret Thatcher, which some of you may know it as a reference, was extremely conservative, extremely right-wing, and hated trade unions with a vengeance. Her aim as a prime minister was to destroy all trade unions. On the other hand, you had people like us, who were kind of left-wing, students, filmmakers, who wanted to open the access of filmmakers to television. And the two came together, very odd marriage, in order to set up what became Channel 4. Channel 4 was the first television in order to, instead of producing in-house like the BBC, they become what's known a publisher's television, i.e. they got people from outside, independent filmmakers, to produce drama, experimental, and of course documentary, a lot of documentary. So that was our opportunity to get in and to be able to get funding for the work that we were producing, but also to have a platform in order to screen it. And what it did, it gave access to documentary not only to independent filmmakers, but to the people. For the first time, we actually heard people with a northern accent, with an Irish accent, with a Scottish accent on television. Till then, you just had the beautiful, pure BBC, Oxford, Cambridge type of accent. So that was kind of, a huge, radical change in the form of production. What it meant is, instead of producing documentaries with large teams of people, as the BBC used to do, you had at least 10, 12 people on board. Now, documentary filmmaking does not need 10, 12 people on a crew, or at least very rarely. With the breaking down of the union, which on one hand, that was an awful thing to do, but on the other hand, it meant that we had freedom to produce how we wanted. I.e., we could have a team of one person if we wanted to, but usually 3, 4 per production team, which meant that we were much more mobile, much more flexible, and much more intimate with the people we were working with. And that was extremely important in relation to the type of films that we wanted to make. So that was just a little, history of the background of UK. But it's important because what it means is we've now got the legacy of a very strong independent movement of filmmakers in the UK. And it forced organisations like the BBC to start working differently. We're still fighting with them, by the way. But also it meant that all of a sudden filmmaking was back in television, but also out in the hands of the people, and being able to set up cine clubs, being able to start showing documentaries in cinema was the next aim. So 10 years ago, I was invited to come and develop a film department at Edinburgh College of Art. When I got to Scotland, I was really surprised to see that Scotland, the land of Grayson, was not very active on independent documentary filmmaking. And that bothered me because I thought, there's so much talent around. How come people are just dedicating themselves to work for television and not for independent documentaries? So we thought that, if we set up an institute like the Scottish Documentary Institute, at least we will become a pain in the back to other people and start putting pressure. Now, we had a canny plan. We thought, if we set up as a production company, then we'll just be a production company. If we set up as a research center, then we'll just be academia. So the plan was to set up something which basically is hybrid. We are academia, we do research in documentary, we train, we discuss documentary, we write about documentary, but we also produce. So we get money from university and we get money from the industry, which was a plus also to be able to run. This is quite an exceptional model. I mean, there is no one else in the UK doing that, to my great surprise, because it does work well. It means that we can explore documentary from different points of view, from the industry point of view and from the academic point of view. So we are a bunch of people working at Scottish Documentary Institute. We're really passionate about documentary. I mean, that's really what drives us. And we try to encourage or maybe impose that passion on other people. So we've got schemes, to try to do that. Every year we decide on a theme for a series of short documentaries, which is known as Bridging the Gap. And we commission 7 young up-and-coming talents in the UK to take part in that scheme. In fact, we commissioned 12, and with those 12, we do regular master classes, workshops about directing, about producing, about pitching, about trailers, about all sorts of aspects of the business, as well as developing the project. Then we get them to pitch, and we select 7, and we give them money in order to produce a film. Now, we don't just give them money, we actually give them support, and that's the most important. We keep a very strong hold on the film and the filmmaker throughout the making of it, in order to make sure that we reach the quality that we think will work on international distribution. Finlay here takes care of the distribution, so in many ways the quality control of the films produced. We also produce feature-length documentaries. It's important to have both on the side, but for those of you who do feature-length documentaries, you know that it often takes 2-3 years, sometimes even more. Maybe some of you will come tonight to see Amy Hardy's film, Age of Dreaming, which is a beautiful film. I really sincerely ask you to come. That took 7 years to make. So we're not in a hurry. We think quality is good. As the Italians say, Rome wasn't built overnight. Well, it's the same with documentary. It takes time. A good documentary needs time to be made, needs time to be reflected, and then, of course, needs time for fundraising also. Let's not forget the reality. Talking of reality, the way we perceive documentary, we think the world is a very chaotic place, and it's getting more and more chaotic. Everything is more and more troubled. I think many of us lose a sense of all the isms that we used to have in the 70s and 80s, all the references of Marxism, socialism, all the ism, as we say in English. Basically, we're losing a sense of that, and documentary filmmakers, in a way, have a social role here, not just as artists, but as a way of translating what their reflection is on the world. And we think of our editing rooms as a lab. We bring all those images of chaos which is happening out there, and back in the editing room, the quietness and the safety of our editing room, then we start trying to tease out another reality, not just a reality of the images that we've got, but our interpretation of reality. And that's really important in creative documentary. It's to be able to transcend what the images and the sounds we've collected into something else, into something which is personal, which is feeding something back into the world. So what we are doing is not just a personal artistic activity, but it's very much developing a voice of our nations. I mean, Scotland, and I can draw a parallel here with the Basque Country, has a very strong identity, very strong cultural identity, and it's very important as such, as an independent nation, to be able to carry on developing that identity, not as something that we are looking just on ourselves, but how we perceive the world, because we are part of it. Being independent means being part with other people. And finding a place in the world is hard, but finding a voice in the world is what we can do best as documentary filmmakers. So, any questions so far?